Well, thank all of you for coming in. Always enjoy opportunity to have a little discussion about the session before we get started. Take any questions that you might have. We will begin the session, of course, on Monday. We will pass the normal resolutions, scheduling the state of the state and the state of the judiciary, and getting a little housekeeping things done. And we'll probably, or not probably, we will take a moment to honor one of our best members that we lost a few weeks ago, and that was our chairman of rules, Jay Powell. And so we'll be doing that on Monday. So, you know, before I start, I have something very important I wanted to talk about, and that is I wanted to commend Jake Fromm on a great career in Georgia. Jake, you know, announced yesterday he's leaving and going to pursue other opportunities in the university and the football program, and the entire state owed him a great debt of gratitude. One of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the University of Georgia. I wish him well as he goes on to the NFL. But I also want to say that I am not going to declare for the NFL. I will be back. So, you know, that won't make everybody happy, but I'm excited about it. So, who's first?
You know, that must be your priorities. So you always say budget, but anything beyond that, anything
Well, we're reviewing, Sandra, some of the study committee reports on maternal mortality. I've not seen the report. I've read some of the media coverage on it. We have the Rural Development Council will have some further recommendations, and I'm meeting with them tomorrow to go through those. You know, that's been a big passion of mine now for 3 or 4 years, and will continue to be. So those are some of them, but I don't really have anything that's kind of burning this session, which kind of makes me dangerous, you know. I don't have anything I need to get. So we're just going to get through the session.
Mr. Speaker, October income revenue down 1.6%, 32 million, 1.2 in November. Governor's asking for what may equal about a $200 million decrease in the operating budget this year. Teachers are waiting for $2,000 to complete a $5,000 campaign promise, and a 2018 legislative promise, I think, was to continue to cut the sales tax in the state. How does that all fit in?
Well, that was not my campaign promise to pay the school teachers an additional sum of money, even though it's a laudable goal. I hope that we're able to do that. I don't know that we will be able to do that this session. You know, I was here in 2018. I think that I view the income tax cut that we did as a commitment that we made to the people of Georgia, the taxpayers of Georgia, that we would do half of it in 1 year, and come back and do another half, so that they would get a full 0.5% cut. So I'm hopeful that we can do that. I know there's a lot of support in the House to do that. You know, we can't do everything, obviously. I know the governor is being very cautious with looking at the economy, which is kind of why we're here, because I think it has to be repeated and stressed that, you know, over the past 10 or so years, we've been very, very conservative in how we manage the state's budget. That included cutting out 20% in the 2010 session. But we've retained our AAA bond rating, we've cut the income tax, we fully funded PPE. And so I think we have taken care of our priorities as a state, but we've done it in a very responsible and conservative way. And so I do rankle a little bit when I hear people talk about wasteful spending, because I'm still trying to find it. I have been for 10 years now.
Mr. Speaker, if you're faced with the question of whether you're going to make relatively large cuts to non-formula agencies or go ahead with the tax cut, if those are your options, which would be your priority?
I'd have to look at the cuts specifically. I don't think you can take a blanket approach to that. I told my caucus Tuesday, we always have to keep in mind that the budget is more than about numbers and percentages, because those are dollars that touch people's lives. Those fund programs which are important to people. So that's why I've been a little, I've kind of smiled when I read some of the things about we're going to be in and out in the early session. That's people that haven't been around a budget cutting session are going to be in for a real surprise.
Speaker, do you believe there's a need for budget cuts?
Well, as he pointed out, we've had some months where we've had downturns in revenue. So I think it's always appropriate to look at whether we need to be cautious and retain our revenue shortfall reserve account at a full level. We have funded it. I think it had 2 days worth of money in it when I first became speaker. So most of the economists, I know you can read some split opinions about that. I'm going to continue to look at that. But under the existing law, we have to work with the revenue estimate that we have, and we will do that.
Mr. Speaker, are you concerned that election year proposals and legislation, we always hear from both sides in election year bills that cater to their respective bases, are you concerned that that might distract from the core priority of passing a budget and addressing the state's needs?
I'm sure that's never happened here. Look, last year was a tough session. We dealt with an issue or two that were tough for both sides, and I respect that. What I would like for us to do is what I think Georgians want us to do, which is to focus on continuing to create the kind of climate where businesses can grow jobs, and folks can get up in the morning and send their kids to good schools and that are safe schools, and deal with transportation issues, and so that's where my focus is going to be, frankly.
Mr. Speaker,
Yeah,
can you talk a little bit about the film tax credit? Is it time to make some changes to that program?
well, I haven't seen the audit. Again, I've read some of the early reporting on it. I was asked a day or so ago would they were abolishing it, and the answer is an unequivocal no. Because what we have to understand is that at the other end of that tax credit is Georgians working. And so if we need to make some tweaks in it, I'm happy to sit down and make the changes that are true to the intent of the legislature in adopting it many years ago. I also I want to satisfy myself, if we talked about the economist having a split opinion on things, you know, there are different audits out there. Some are more positive than others. I don't know how they can reach such different results, but having said all of that, if we need to make some changes, I'm happy to have some discussion about that, but I think it's important that we come into this process being very clear that we're going to continue that.
I wanted to ask you about your priorities for rural Georgia and some specific legislation. Once again, Kevin Tanner's rural transit bill, and then speaking of audits, I also would like to hear your thoughts on the rural hospital tax credit. That also had an audit that came out in the past month too.
Well, and it didn't score very well, so I don't know if we need to revisit that. That could be one of the things that we want to go back and talk about. Rural transit was a real priority of the House last session, and apparently was not a priority over on the other side of the building. I'm hoping that they will see the value in partnering with us on that issue this session, because we're going to continue to advocate for that.
Any other rural priorities?
I'll let you know more after I meet with my guys tomorrow. How about that? Yeah, Bill.
Mr. Speaker, when we look at the slowdown in revenues or the potential slowdown in the economy, it always makes sense to do more with less, but there's also the option of looking for new sources of revenue. Are you sensing any shift in climate on gaming expansion or a referendum for the people this upcoming election cycle, as the governor's indicated he would not block?
Well, it's interesting you would ask that question, because I understand that my joint committee is meeting at this very moment somewhere here in the building. So after they meet, I'm going to sit down with them. What I charged them to do last August was to go out in the state using the Rural Development Council as a model and engage with Georgians, not to advocate for or against these issues, but basically to be objective and inform people of the options and what would be involved, and then come back and sort of let me know if Georgians really are ready to vote on that. I mean, that's what we're talking about at the end of the day, is do we trust Georgians enough to let them make the decision as they have to under our law. We've talked about this issue here for years. So one of these days we're either going to have to say we're going to quit talking or we're going to vote it. However it comes out is the way it comes out. I've deferred to others here in the building in terms of their enthusiasm for the issue. I found out that there are three sure things in life: death, taxes, and commitments by our friends across the hall that they're going to move a bill out on gaming this session. And that horse is still at the gate. So we're not going to wait on them this year. If we decide to vote, I think we're going to vote. Let them deal with it. If we decide not to vote and they want to vote, then we'll deal with that. But at some point, I think it is appropriate to let the people of Georgia have the final word.
Mr. Speaker, if it goes to a constitutional amendment on the ballot, what would that look like? Would that be internet, OTB, track betting, and even casinos? Would you see that being the entire?
Well, there's a school, for casinos it would have to be, and for pari-mutuel betting, horses it would have to be. There's a school of thought, I'm told, that as far as the sports betting, that it would not have to be. But then I think probably the more cautious approach is to just draft the language in such a way that you're taking care of all three.
Mr. Speaker, last session there was some talk of taking over the airport, Hartsville-Jackson, from the city of Atlanta. Will that be something that may be discussed again this session?
Well, I'm not sure that in a session that we're being asked to cut the budget, it's a good time to talk about taking on an enterprise like the Atlanta airport.
Mr. Speaker.
I was pretty clear last session that I had some very serious concerns that was not the best solution. State takeover. Nothing has changed my mind. Now, a separate question is there a proper role for legislative oversight of the operation of the airport? And that's something I think we can have a discussion about. It'd be modeled after MARTOC, oversight committee that oversees MARTA. But I'm still inclined to be a no on the state takeover.
Mr. Speaker, given the kind of budget cuts and budget uncertainty, what are the talks and plans you're having around addressing what some are calling a rural health crisis and the high numbers of uninsured?
Well, obviously the budget kind of constrains what we can do in that regard. For example, was the maternal mortality committee. I think they're going to recommend some coverage for mothers for some period of time as a way to address what is a critical issue here in the state, and one we can't ignore any longer. The question becomes, is this the year we can do that? And I think that remains to be seen, because as I said earlier, we simply can't do everything.
Are you seeing more of an appetite for some of these revenue generators, like the marketplace facilitator bill and maybe a tobacco tax, sales tax increase?
I am more optimistic than I was last year about that. I think you're going to possibly see some movement, and perhaps even early in the session.
Mr. Speaker? There's been efforts to help more families adopt foster children, but some of those include provisions that restrict access to same-sex couples. What would be your take on any adoption bill that came up that had this sort of provision?
My take would be the same as it was the last time we did adoption reform. I thought it was incredibly ill-conceived and offensive that one of the most important pieces of legislation that we passed that year got hung up in the Senate over that issue. I will advocate very strongly that not get hung up.
Mr. Speaker, there's a religious liberty bill over in the Senate that could come back to life. The governor has said he would sign a mirror image of the federal RICO law. I know you have said that you're focused on both the budget, things that could bring Georgia prosperity, but do you have any feelings on that bill, opinions on it that came over there?
For him to sign it, it's got to pass both houses. I've said before, I mean, when you look at the experience of other states, I think you could probably call Vice President Pence and get his take on that. Which would probably be a little different than whoever's got the bill in the Senate. I think that's a solution that serves the problem, frankly.
Mr. Speaker, you talk about maternal mortality, there's an idea floating out there of extending Medicaid coverage to mothers for a year after birth. What do you think about that idea?
Well, yeah, that was what I was alluding to a moment ago, Mark. I think that's something that I want to look at very seriously. The real question may be, are we in a position to do it now in this budget plan?
Mr. Speaker, you mentioned a little while ago the idea of revenue, new revenue sources, and something that might be taken up early in the session, aside from the legal and the other ideas. Is there anything, being the second year of the term, you've got a lot of legislation sitting out there. Is there anything else you think is going to move quickly, the sessions, maybe already lined up?
I haven't thought about that. I'm sure there will be some things. We're looking at some of the rural transit being one we talked about earlier. I would hope that we can move that. Either the Senate pass a standalone bill or adopt a conference committee report soon. So those are a couple.
Can you talk about, the governor has made some administrative proposals regarding Medicaid. Do you foresee that you're going to have to allot any more money to pay for those proposals this year?
I hope not, because I'm not sure when we'll get it. Those proposals, I think I commend the governor for those proposals and for those actions. And, once again, though, I mean, we're in a little bit of a slowdown here, and until we kind of get a better sense of where we're going with the economy, then I don't know that we want to be taking on significant levels of spending.
One of the bills that wasn't left in last year is one by Representative Ballinger regarding raising the age of juveniles to be tried as adults. Wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, I think Mandy Ballinger is probably one of the leading experts in this country on juvenile justice and juvenile law. I plan to, I know she and her committee have drilled down in this, and I'm going to probably follow their lead on that. Whatever they choose to do, I'm going to support it.
Speaker, you mentioned it was a tough session last year, and I wonder how much of that atmosphere you think might come into this session, the divisions, the feelings that whole.
None, I hope.
So it's going to be a new session in terms of the feelings?
Well, it will be a new session. Every session is different. Every session takes on its own sort of identity, and I said I hope, but that didn't mean I predict. Part of this is that we're in a competitive political climate in Georgia now, and when that is true, then you have both parties are kind of competing in a very intense way. I get that, but my goal is that the House will, that members will respect each other during debate and be civil, because you really can be civil and disagree, once upon a time we did that. I think it's time we get back to that.
Mr. Speaker, can you talk about, what would you say to anybody who comes to the Capitol this year asking for state funding for Metro Atlanta Transit, for that plan from the ATL? They say, we've got this plan, maybe the state can pony up a little money.
Well, I'm going to say to them what I'm probably going to say to others, that you might need to come back next year. If the economy, if we're more optimistic about the economy, and the available revenues. I mean, look at the end of the day, I mean, you know, we have to balance our budget as a state. We've done that all of these years. You know, you have to be very, very careful. I mean, this is going to be a very interesting session because, you know, we have members in both chambers. I know we do in the House, and, you know, they give speeches about cutting the budget. Well, they're going to get their chance this session. They're going to get their chance, and I think they're going to find out that it's a little easier said than done. Because, you know, one guy's waste is another gal's vital expenditure. And I think people are going to have a wake-up call on that this session.
Mr. Speaker, very similar, but what do you tell constituents when they're coming to the Capitol in this tight budget who are asking for funding for essential needs and healthcare and education funding? What do you tell those people that are asking their lawmakers for this?
Well, I tell them that we have to prioritize and that we have certain obligations that we have to meet, such as healthcare being one of them, education being one, public safety obviously being one, that you know, we're in we have limited means, and there's a lot you wish you could do, much of which you don't really need to do, but we'll ask people to be patient. If it's something that we can, you know, wait until next year and talk about, we will do that.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Singleton pre-filed a bill having to do with transgender youth and their ability to compete in youth sports with the gender which they identify with. Have you taken a look at that? And
Not really.
You have not?
Going back to the sports betting, and I know you want to talk to that committee, there's some question whether it would be easier to pass if you split sports betting off. Maybe there's not an appetite from a lot of members to have all three. What is your view on that, just personally?
Well, you know, there is that school of thought, and then there's a school of thought that maybe that's not true. I don't know if it is or not. I know that some of that discussion is being driven by some of the industry interests which are involved in that activity. And I know they obviously want it very much, and then the industry interests that are not into sports betting don't want it very much, splitting off. You know, we're going to have to sit down and vote this thing. I mean, this is, you know, this whole issue is really more than about do you favor an expansion of gaming. I mean, that's kind of the basic question, but then if you say the answer to that is yes, then there's a whole lot of questions that come in. The regulatory environment and the tax rate and how many licenses you issue, the model that you create for sports betting. So, you know, what we have to keep in mind, sports betting is happening in Georgia now.
We're just not getting any of it.
We're just not getting any money off of it. I mean, it's a big deal here in this state now. We have to keep that in the back of our mind.
Mr. Speaker, one of the issues that Representative Powell worked on for a long time was trust funds and making sure that those designated funds are protected for the use that they were thought out to be used for. Do you think that in his absence there will be movement on that issue?
That would make him happy. You know, he was very passionate about that, and then some of his, and he was a very dear friend, and then some of his friends who are dear, dear friends of mine were equally opposed to it. I don't know that it would be so much a thing of in his absence. I think it's going to rise and fall on its own merit, and it is something that, frankly, I kind of I sympathized with him and agreed with him on. And so we'll see if somebody takes up that cause, and we'll give them a hearing and see where it goes.
Mr. Speaker, last year there was a small but vocal challenge to your leadership over your use of legislative leave. I know that there was a law passed. What are your feelings on that law being passed, and do you foresee continued rumbling this year about your leadership over that issue?
Haven't heard any rumblings. The caucus has been extremely supportive. I feel energized and I feel good. And you know, I thought the law was a good, positive change in the law. And you know, I made a couple of commitments to the House. The law being one of them, we fulfill that, and I fulfill the other over the course of the summer. And
Sorry, what was that over the course of some of the other obligations?
completing some of the cases that were
right.
publicized by certain media outlets. But you know, the rumblings, you know, I've kind of moved on. And, at the end of the day, the rumblings were from people who were opposed to the way I lead the House before. They'll be opposed to the way I lead the House after. So it's just part of the territory that comes to being the Speaker.
There's another study committee for the Senate that met off session regarding seatbelts and requiring everyone to wear the vaccine. That still has to make its way over there, but I'm curious to your thoughts on that.
Requiring seatbelts in the
For
vaccine.
everyone, the vaccine, not just children.
I've not seen that report, Sandra. I would want to see what the data says in terms of the benefit from that. I mean, I guess one thing that separates me from Speaker Murphy is having a great interest in seatbelts. You know, I let the seatbelts in pickup trucks out for a vote, and I think in the House it passed like 171 to 2, which tells me that maybe he was on the wrong side of that issue all those years, or the House had changed, or both. So we'll look at the data and see, you know, whatever we can do at the end of the day to make driving safer for the Georgians. I think we have to look at it, such as the texting and driving bill that we did. Yeah, Jim.
I know you've expressed some concerns about some of the unintended consequences of the hemp legislation.
Of what?
The hemp legislation?
Yeah.
Do you see a need for any legislative fixes this year?
I think it's too early to say. The Department of Agriculture, I'm not sure that they have completed their adoption of rules and regs. And I think that it would be premature until they do for us to have that discussion.
I think I'm specifically referring to the testing, the field testing of hemp and recreational marijuana. There's sort of a laxer attitude in some jurisdictions towards the...
Oh, towards the prosecution.
Right, exactly. Do you see any need for legislation that might address those the enforcement side?
You know, we were hoping that the GBI could help us there. I'm not sure they're going to be able to, and I'm not being critical. The technology may not be there yet, maybe cost prohibitive, and so if we make a determination that they can't be helpful for whatever reason, then it may be time to kind of go back and look at that. I think that to allow prosecutors in various jurisdictions to pick and choose what they want to prosecute, it sets a very dangerous precedent, frankly.
Mr. Speaker, there were efforts in the House last year to attack the state's HIV epidemic. Do you foresee that also being a focus this year? What's the import to that in your mind?
I hope we can move further on that. I know, I think was that Chairman Cooper?
Yes.
That did that, and she did some great work on that. And so I would be hopeful that we could make further progress this session on that.
Let's do a couple of closing months.
Particularly considering the need for new revenues, do you sense any pressure to again address raising a tobacco tax or taxing vaping products?
Well, it's two separate questions. I don't know. I don't want to get into tax increases. Now the vaping is a little different because it's newer. I know new chairman, Bonnie Rich, is working on a bill that I haven't seen yet, but I'm not sure if she's going to address that issue in her vaping bill or not. But my general inclination is that tax increases are kind of non-starters.
Mr. Speaker, you referred to it a couple of times. Can you address what is the relationship you feel like between House leadership and Senate leadership? Do you think you're going to have some maybe open battles or situations that may come up with this session? Like I said, you mentioned it with a couple of pieces of legislation, and also your relationship with the governor's office.
I think we have a good relationship with the Senate, and I have a lot of respect for their leadership. And I mean, does anybody remember a time there wasn't some natural rivalry between the two chambers? I mean, it's just kind of part of the process here. I don't think I could take that out of what we do. And the governor's office, we have a good relationship. I've known Governor Kemp for a long time, and we talk frequently, and so I think everybody here is getting along pretty well right now.
Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of this, you kind of said, hi, good morning. You kind of said, I don't have specific priorities, that makes me a little dangerous. What do you mean by that?
Well, that just means that there's nothing I need. There's nothing that I need to deal for, deal away, deal for it. So that can be a dangerous thing because, I can be off the chain.
The last question.
Mr. Speaker, looking at I keep hearing revenue and revenue generators and new revenue. What about the possibility of lost revenue? I think, not to quote you, you said you haven't had an opportunity to read the audit on the film industry. And I could say, for one, North Georgia has been a benefactor of the tax credit of the film industry. They're filming something there every day, so in no way am I advocating to end that. But reading some of the reporting, if a company doesn't need the sales tax credit, they can sell it for cash. I mean, there's little things like that. I call them little things. Are you saying can you tell us once you look into this, not ending that credit, but maybe tightening it up? Maybe it's the time.
I think that's what I said.
Is it what you said? I don't know.
No, that's what I said.
Okay, because
I said I'm not in favor of ending it.
Right.
Will not favor ending it. Will not let a bill ending it go through the House. I said I'm going to look at the report, and if what I'm hearing is true, then I think there are improvements that we can make to it, and changes that we can make to it that would be true to the legislative intent when we adopted it.
But you're open to looking at it?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
We'll end on that definitive note. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you on Monday.